Good morning, my beautiful children. I cannot believe it is already Wednesday. And today we're going to read another chapter in the Birchbark House by Louise Erdrich. Today's chapter is called Andeg. And as you recall, yesterday, Omakai's father came home, which was very exciting. She loves her father very much, and so he brought some gifts and some things. And so let's see what happens today in this chapter. Just a reminder that Omakaius seems to have some kind of a special relationship with her little brother Miru. Perhaps she will be able to name him. All right, Andeg. The world changed when father was home. Everyone had to be more careful and orderly. When Mama and Grandma were in charge, there was a way to do things, of course, and yet there was room for mistakes. Mistakes were funny and could be fixed. With Omakaius' father, Mikwam, or Ice, everything had to be done exactly right. He was a commanding person, over 6 feet tall, and with a shrewdness in his expression that impressed other men. Often he dressed himself quite handsomely: full turban, beaded velvet vest, calico shirt of fine red cloth, a bandolier bag, earrings — he always wore at least one fancy earring — and it glittered and spun at his jaw when he abruptly halted or changed direction in his walking. Mikwam was very funny, and the camp was always full of laughter, but it was an uneasy laughter. At any moment, Dede, or father's, mood could change to barbed annoyance. Much of the laughter had to do with her father's sly wit and sharp tongue. There was no one he could not intimidate, no one who escaped the sharp humor of his gaze, no one about whom he could not make a joke. He even teased old Tallow, but he loved giving her little gifts too, and in the evenings he told stories until way after the owl began to call. With father home, things were more exciting, things were more difficult, things were less predictable, but somehow they were more secure. First thing father noticed was the corn, how tall it had grown, how the rain had plumped up the ears. What a good crop they had this year. Mama and Grandma were pleased and contented with the crop, but father was jealous of the amount of new corn he saw the crows devouring. Early one morning on the second day he was home, he cut poles and used basswood twine to rope together 2 platforms, one on either side of the cornfield. And when he had tied the legs securely, and when he had positioned them just so, he called Angeline and Okomias. "I want you to climb up and stay here and drive away those birds." He gave Okomias 2 smooth sticks to clack together to frighten the flocks, and Angeline his tattered old shirt to flap in the air. He didn't need it any more, for Mamma had made him a new suit of clothes: a calico shirt, skin leggings, a set of blue broadcloth breeches trimmed with red wool. Onto the shirt she had sewn 4 carefully hoarded brass buttons, gleaming, each marked with the French flower that the voyagers called fleur de luce. And now, on a sunny day, with the sweet haze in the air and the promise of rain low and far at the edge of the horizon, Okomias and Angeline started for the cornfield. They argued back and forth about everything and nothing at all. Stubborn and bored with each other, they fell silent. The garden place lay at the end of a short path through the woods, and on the way they walked without a sound, each other in her own thoughts. Perhaps because they had fallen into an angry silence, they walked quietly enough to come upon Old Horn, the magnificent buck deer who had lost half of his antler rack defending his island territory. He seemed to have damaged his head in some way, so that only one of his antlers grew back properly. It was a beautiful antler, proud and pointed, but the other was only a stump. Unafraid of the girls, One Horn stepped out into the path and stood alert in the early light, basking a little, warming his coat. Okomias and Angeline stood still, held by his beauty and by the strength of his gaze. His graceful, leaf-shaped ears tilted forward as though he could hear their hearts beating. His brown eyes were commanding and kind. He took a step toward them and stopped. Another step. Stopped. and then suddenly, as though yanked into the air by a giant invisible rope, he leaped and disappeared. Well, he must have heard something coming that we didn't, Angeline said, and sure enough, Father was behind them, right behind them, with no warning. What's wrong with you girls? He said, his voice sharp. The crows are feasting while you stand here and jabber. He walked past them, his stride long. They hurried to the field, climbed onto the platforms, and shooed away the few birds that had settled in the corn. At first it was fun to wave and shout across the field from the perches. Boo-zoo-hoo! Called Okomias. Boo-zoo-hoo! Called Angelina back. Ninnaboopidoo Wisdom! Okanias yelled. I'm hungry too, was the answer. What did you bring to eat? Angeline had brought nothing. Well, we could roast some corn, suggested Okomias from across the field. We could roast some crows, cried Angeline. How will we catch them? Shouted Okomias. I'll get Nokomis's fishing net, Angeline answered. We'll throw it over them when they land. So far, not a single bird had eaten so much as a kernel of corn because the two girls were making so much noise. But as soon as Angeline left her stand to fetch the net from Grandma, a whirling cloud of crows descended. The smart crows and red-winged blackbirds knew when their chances of getting a bite of corn had improved. The crows spread out over the corn with their cries of greed. Ravens, bigger and smarter, waited on the outskirts of the field to see whether it was safe to join them in the feast. Determined, Okomias yelled louder and clacked her sticks. She had helped harvest each seed saved in Mama's seed bag. She had watered those seeds with water and hauled them from the lake. Water, 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 until they sprouted and grew. Then she had loosened the earth and weeded with Mama's big moose antler hoe and her own small hoe, carved from a crooked tree branch. She had guided these corn plants and worked hard, and she was not now going to give up the winter's dried corn soup to a flock of birds, no matter how darn hungry they were. Again the birds fell on the corn with starving cries. Again Okomias ran down, screaming to drive them off. Father was right. The birds' eyes glistened greedily as they tore into each plump ear of corn and pecked at the juicy young kernels. Their cries were ferocious until her sister returned. Okomias ran from one end of the field to the other, shouting, flapping her dad's old shirt and clacking the sticks. After a time, she was too tired to run fast, and her shout came out a croak as hoarse as a crow's. Angeline returned with the net, finally, and they tried to cast it over the birds. The net worked much better at catching fish than it did birds. However wide and gracefully they tried to toss it, the net always flew clumsily. The birds saw it coming, darted off, and even seemed to laugh and taunt them with their cries as they landed, eating noisily in another part of the field. Oh my, we've got to trick them, Angeline said. Trick them? How? Okomias panted. I've got an idea, said Angeline. They draped one of Grandmother's nets carefully over the cornstalk to make a ceiling. Angeline stood behind the cornstalk. It stood behind the cornstalk room with the other net held wide, and Okomias ran to the other side of the field, and when the birds landed before her, she slowly, unhurriedly, with no shouting and no sudden movements, walked toward her sister. The birds hopped before her, or flew a short distance. They were not frightened enough to wheel high into the air. They continued toward the net, and then they slipped under the nets to forage, hopped further beneath toward Angeline until they finally ran into the wall of twines and flapped high to the ceiling of the net. In alarm, they panicked and they tried to fly through the links that Nokomias had woven and caught a foot, a wing, a tiny head. Even though she had hated them just an hour before, Okomias now felt very badly for betraying them. And as she drove the birds into the net, she begged them to forgive her, saying the words that she had heard her grandmother use. Forgive us, forgive us. We have need. We have need. She turned away as Angeline caught each struggling, flapping bird and broke its neck with one quick, strong twist. They harvested birds for the next hour and the next hour until the sun sank low and the remaining birds withdrew to their perches for the night. Then, as Okomias was gathering in the folding Nokomis's net, she noticed one bird was left, struggling hard to free itself. It was a young crow from a late nest. Though it hopped up and down with great energy, it couldn't quite fly. They already had a pile of birds large enough to fill the biggest parching tray which Angeline had fetched from the camp. Okomias decided to set the last bird free, and she gently undid the basswood fiber twine from the sharp black clawed foot, its neck, a ragged baby feathered wing. Holding the bird in her hands, she set it on the ground and waited for it to fly off. But it sat still, and when she tried to shoo it into the air, it only hopped a few steps, dragged a hurt wing. Okomias looked around for a heavy stick to club it, but put it out of it and to put it out of its pain. Then something stopped her. She looked down at the bird, gazed up at her with such calm, trusting curiosity that it almost seemed to speak aloud. Its round eyes were a deep, milky blue, and it cocked its head sideways, back and forth, to get a good look at Okomias. She looked around to see if Angeline was watching, but she wasn't. And with a swift movement, Okomias reached down and scooped the bird into a small carrying sack at her waist. It nestled in so silently that she soon forgot she had the bird in her bag. Now Okomias and Angeline spent what seemed like an endless time plucking the birds, cleaning them, scorching the pin feathers, those just growing in too tiny to pull off. Then the birds were ready to roast. Mamma packed them close together along the wild onion bulbs and then pressed a steam bed of milk carefully around them. She set them in a pit in the middle of the fire and heaped live coals all around and bought them. As the birds cooked, bits of steam broke through tiny cracks in the mud and scented the air with a delicious fragrance. A few ears of ripe corn, blueberries, and a strong tea of wintergreen made the rest of the feast, and when the birds were done, Mamma used a stick to roll the balls of birds from the fire. And when she cracked open the baked mud, sitting down together around the fire, they ate roasted corn, sweet blueberries, and picked the delicate meat off the tiny bird bones. Each bird was no more than a few mouthfuls, hot, tasty, spiced with the oniony brown flavor. There was more than enough to fill each person, and they were all satisfied. "These are my daughters," said Father proudly. "Not only did they save the corn today, but they caught and plucked our dinner. Oh, these girls are hunters." He took his pipe from his bag to smoke it in their honor, and each girl felt warm and very proud. They leaned back a little, looking up to the fire. Grandmother also took out a woman's pipe. She filled the bowl with she filled the bowl, tamped the pipe carefully, and lit the glowing stick. Okomias wanted to ask her for a story, but she knew that Nokonimus, Grandma, always refused, no matter how hard they begged, until the last frog was safely sleeping on the ground. Father, with his half-white cloud, could often be persuaded to tell stories because his were different than Grandma's. Hers were stories meant for the winter. Father usually talked about his travels, the places he'd seen, the people, the close calls, the momentous encounters with animals, weather, and Aschenbeg, the best of all, ghosts. And he'd smoke his pipe, and at Angeline's request, Father spoke. And here is Father's ghost story that he told the family. We were coming out of the rapids about 2 days from the town in a part of the river that I knew all too well, when I tasted a storm. The last thing I wanted right about then was a storm. I wanted to get my men, our canoe, past that spit of land. It's shaped like a little hook and juts out into the river. The name of that place is Where the Sisters Eat. I wanted to get past it because we were hoping to catch up with a certain trader and sell him. Besides, as I'd heard it, nobody liked to camp there at Where the Sisters Eat. Strange things seemed to happen at that place. Still, when the sky opened up and the rain poured down, I decided that my fears were foolish. As much as my men wanted to go on, I decided we had no choice. They grumbled, but we pulled into shore, dragged our canoes up to the drier ground under the pine trees. By then, the rain was driving down hard. The wind was shaking the trees. There was no question of making a fire. We had to wait it out in the cold and in the dark. So I heaped pine needles and soft branches in a bed, rolled myself underneath the canoe in my blanket. So far, everything was fine, I thought. Maybe the stories I'd heard about the place were lies, things that never happened. I turned over to try and get a little sleep. I had barely dozed off when a sudden shaft of lightning hit near, struck a tree that crashed down in the woods. All I could do was hope. I had chosen a lucky spot where lightning wouldn't strike, where no tree would topple down. I should have taken my tobacco out right then and offered it up to the good spirits to protect me. I should have remembered my mother's ways, but I did not. And here is what happened after I fell asleep again. The next time I awoke, I came awake with a jolt, uneasy, too quiet. That's the first thing I thought. Just too quiet. There was no wind, no rain, no moonlight either. The clouds had hung thick and heavy as a priest's black wool robe. I waved my hand in front of my face. I couldn't even see the barest outline of my hand. That's how dark it was. And when I heard the women arguing over bones. There were, of course, no living women within hundreds of miles, but I was groggy and didn't think of that. All I could think of is how loud these women were talking. "Hey, you ladies, be quiet! Someone's trying to sleep here," I called. And for a little while they lowered their voices, and then their argument broke out again, and they started to shout. They had settled down to quarrel near my canoe, and I was now steaming mad. "Hey!" I yelled at them loud and harsh to be quiet. "Be quiet!" Again they lowered their voices, but just as soon as I got comfortable again and started to doze, they broke into a loud chatter once more. Why, it wasn't that they sounded ugly. Their voices were high and sweet, though they were having a disagreement. It was just that they were loud and right over my head. Sitting on the canoe, I heard their weight creaking the spruce ribs of my canoe. "You be careful out there." I was getting even angrier. They took no notice of me. They just continued their excitement and their excited disagreement. Here's what they said. "You give me the first meat, sister. You take the first bone." "No, you give me the second meat. You take the first bone." "I'll have a foot." "I'll have a head." "No, you won't. I'll have the head and the leg too, sister." "Well, how shall we divide up the others?" "Well, let's gamble for them. Let's." "It's a good thing we raised that storm," said one of the sisters, laughing. "How else could we catch our food so easily?" "My stomach hurts," was the answer. "It's been a long time since we caught this many humans." And then all of a sudden I understood. I was the first meat, the second bone. The men were the food. Then those ghostly sisters had come to hold their feast on us. My sweat turned cold. I remembered all too well how bothersome bad spirits were, how dangerous they could be. These ones had perhaps starved to death and were eternally hungry. They themselves had revealed how they struck up storms to force travelers to seek shelter. No wonder my men hadn't wanted to camp out in this spit of land called Where the Sisters Eat. Father fell silent and then stared into the fire at the center. Nobody said a word. Even baby Niu seemed to listen horrified as Father thought about his next move. How could he save himself from these cannibal ghosts? Father finally went on. "Here's what I did. I thought of my father's advice. 'Never let fear take your mind away,' he said. 'Always think.' So instead of giving in to fear, I put fear aside and I thought, and into my mind, once I let myself hear it, a plan came. Immediately I put it into action. Bam! Bam! I began to knock on the inside of my canoe. I huffed like a bear. Roar! Roar! And I shouted in a growly voice, "Wasn't he delicious, this man? Best one I ever ate!" "Ooh, did you hear that?" said the sister above me. A bear has eaten some of our most precious food. How dare that bear steal from us? They were both furious, and to make them more furious yet, I stuck the butt of my rifle out and whacked one of their feet hard. Ah! Ow! Ow! She cried. Why did you hurt me, my older sister? "I didn't do that," said the older. "You did too," shrieked the younger. "You and that bear, always lying and greedy." "Me and that bear? Nothing. Take that!" And then she hit her sister. Father gave a horrifying shriek that made the skin on Okamaya's neck crawl, and her heart jolt, and her scalp tighten with fear. She snuggled deeper into the blankets and robes next to Grandma, who held her tight. Ow! Again, Father gave his version of the ghostly shriek. Big Pinch covered his head and crashed into Mama's lap. Father let a silence fall and then told the ending of the story in a hushed, spooky tone. Now the two sisters began to hit each other, first with their fists, then with their sticks, and then with rocks pulled from the ground. And while they were occupied with trying to kill each other, I loaded my canoe as quick as could be. I could hear the others doing the same, no doubt listening to the sisters' plan to eat us. The men had been shaking in their blankets. Just as we were pushing off, one of the sisters noticed us leaving, and with a scream, she bounded toward us. I was the last one out. Steering from behind, I shouted to my men, "Paddle! Paddle, men, paddle!" Still, the evil sister managed to grab my shirt and rip it almost into shreds. See, look at it now. Father solemnly produced the pieces of shirt that his daughter had used to frighten off the birds that day. Big Pinch gasped, and the girls were silent. "Yes," said Father, "it was lucky that I got out of there alive. And do you know, after I hit the ghost with my gun barrel and the gun split on me, it refused to let me fix it. Fortunately, we did catch up with that trader who always made such a good price to us, and luckily—" Father drew out his last word teasingly, which made the girls' ears perk with interest. "And luckily, I was able to trade for a few small things." Father drew a little cloth-wrapped package from his shirt, and he opened up the package with such care that Okomayas thought he might have brought back a live thing. Perhaps it was a small squirrel, or maybe, she thought, maybe that tiny bird in her carrying sack was even still there. Probably it was quite dead by now, she thought. Okomayas felt a pang. She focused again on Father's gift, but couldn't stop thinking about the bird that she left in her pocket. He loved giving gifts, Father did, drawing out the suspense. He always chose wonderful things, too. This time he drew from his small sack a long, thick band of ribbon for Angeline. For Mamma, he had a precious dress length of calico cloth, deep red with blue and pink flowers all over it. And for Grandma, he brought her tobacco, a big twist of it, gold and brown. Big Pinch received a small knife, and Baby Niwu one piece of velvet to lay against his soft cheek. And for Okomayas, something special was in store, said Father, something he had made himself. And then she caught her breath. "Oh," he said, "here, this is for you." And he handed her the sawed-off length of his gun barrel, the one that had ruined itself after he struck the ghost sister's feet. The end of the gun barrel was pinched together with tongs and given a rough, sharp edge. It was clearly Okomayas's. Oh, it was clearly, Okomayas gulped to see, a hide scraper. A hide scraper. When Mamma showed me what a good job you'd done with the moose hide for my moccasins, Father said, I decided that you should have my old gun barrel for your own first scraping tool. The skin, the skins that you prepared for my moccasins are very fine, Okomayas, and from now on, I want you to prepare the skins often for Mamma and for me. Take this, he said, and he handed Okomayas the broken gun barrel. Okomayas was confused. Pride fought with dismay inside of her, and she took the gun barrel, hide flesher from her father with a conflicted heart. Preparing hides? Her most hated work? Ugh! And now, just because she'd done a good job one time, she was picked out special for the rest of her life. She would be condemned to soften and tan, work the stinking hides. No! She wanted to say, I won't take it. I want ribbon like Angeline's, only red, maybe, or yellow. Cloth, please, just a bit of sweetness. A licorice stub. Anything, anything but this gun, she thought. But she didn't say it. She took father's gift with tender thanks, knowing how much he delighted in choosing the presents and how he rarely praised her. Almost resentfully, she took over father's new moccasins. Surrounded and held by Mama's moccasins, they looked fresh, neat, new. Okomayas had to admit the hide that she had tanned really was beautiful. Suddenly her heart thumped. Her throat shut. Oh, father's moccasin! Oh, she was sure she saw it move. It had moved. She was sure of it again. Look! Her voice trembled. It's... And the others looked. This time the moccasin took a big hop forward, and everyone, even father, cried out in surprise, Ah! They were all frozen in shock. The moccasin sat quiet, still, and then Nokomias leaned over, poked at it with the stick. The moccasin twitched, then squawked. Okomias jumped up, for she remembered instantly that she left her carrying sack right next to the door with the moccasins, and sure enough, her bird popped its head out bright, and in the sound of everyone's laughter, it blinked with interest, cheerful, greedy, hungry, and unafraid. And that is the end of our chapter. So it seems they enjoy stories very much. And Father told a story about a ghost. Do you really think there was a ghost, or was that lightning and thunder, and they were really just trying to escape? I don't know. I think it's interesting that Okomayas now seems to be praised by her father, and it doesn't seem that father praises her very much. So she seems to be taking with stride the gift that he gave her, even though she'd rather had a ribbon. All right. Tomorrow, my dear children, is it's a new section of the book. That was summer. This is fall. And in her language, it's dagwagging, which means fall. So, I hope that you are listening to this because this is very much like the people of the eastern woodlands. The way that our friend Okomayas and her family live is very much how the people in the eastern woodlands would live. In their birchbark houses, the way they hunt and fish, all of the things that are in this story. So, in any event, enjoy your day. Work hard, my beautiful children, and I will see you in group.